Hey guys, just gonna give you a quick rundown about what the elements of art and principles of design are. So, a lot of times people will ask me, how do you know what's a good piece of art? What makes a good piece of art? So, these are two basic categories that we'll be looking at a lot, and you'll be writing about them about your own work throughout the semester. So, let's get started and we'll look at this. So, if you think about the elements of art as sort of like building blocks or ingredients of art, say you have a cake and you're going to want to bake that, and you need certain ingredients to make a cake. So maybe flour, sugar, icing, eggs, oil, water, who knows, all the different things that you can put in there. So elements are kind of like the basic things that you would create while you're making a piece of artwork. So one of the things that you think about when you look at a piece of blank paper is you look at the way you want to arrange things on the piece of paper. So that word we call composition. So sometimes I might say, well, your composition is a little uneasy or is not arranged properly. Um, so we're going to look at the way that these elements will help your composition. All right, so the first one, and if you're taking notes, which I probably would in your sketchbook, is line. So line is the element of art where you just make a mark on the surface. You can do it squiggly lines, curvy lines, zigzag lines, and you can use this with any tools. Some artists, like Ansel Adams there, will use photography even to create really long lines with the trees. You can see them going up. And then other times we might look at perspective drawing where it looks like the illusion of a certain line where your eye disappears in perspective going down that bridge. All right. And just basic shapes and lines, curved, thick, thin. There's a piece by Picasso. All right, the next thing an artist will do, number two, is think about shape. So when lines start connecting together, they create shapes. Lines can be geometric or they can be organic. So this piece by Paul Klee is a very abstract piece, looks very childlike, and it can be interpreted however you want to look at it. It could be monsters, or maybe there's some kind of flying thing, or a fish in there, and a starfish, all sorts of different ideas of what can be going on in this piece. But those are basic shapes, and they're just making one piece of art. Sometimes we'll look at shapes even in color. So at this piece right here, you'll look at all the different shapes of the fruits and vegetables and how they create something that looks a little more dimensional. Which brings us to our next thing. Shapes will be turned into forms. So they are three-dimensional, and now it's showing like the space or the mass around the objects. Sometimes in sculpture, we'll look at literal shapes where it's a piece that is actually carved out, or that piece there by Deborah Butterfield actually is at the Hunter Museum, and it's a piece of sculpture made out of tree bark. All right, and then the next thing an artist will look at is value. So value is not about the price of how something cost in art, which, I mean, we can look at that too. Some pieces are worth a lot of money and some pieces aren't. But value is really looking at the dark and lightness of something. So like shadows. So in your sketchbook, we will be creating a value scale, which goes from 0, which is really, really dark as your pencil or pen or whatever tool you're using, will go all the way down to 10, which is as light as it goes. So depending on if you buy those drawing pencils, you can use those because they're already marked for you, 1, 2, 3, 4, or how much pressure you put down on something. So value can be used by shading, like in this picture by M.C. Escher, where it looks like different levels going on with the fish in the water, the trees reflection, so you know there's trees there, and then very light leaves that are laying on top of it. And then also we'll look at value in shading, where Picasso here did what we call a blue period, where he painted most of his pieces in blue tones, or otherwise known as monochromatic, where you take one color and use all of its shades and values. All right, and the last of the elements is color. So obviously color is very complex, and we're getting a whole unit about that, but another word you might hear artists say is hue, and we'll look at the intensity and how light and dark a color could be. We sometimes will see very thrown on chunky pieces of color like you see in that piece, or very flat and simple shapes that color can be created with. All right, so we're going to look at the color wheel, and we will paint a color wheel at some point in time. And that's why I told you guys you only need red, yellow, blue, black, and white, because really you can create all those colors just using red, yellow, and blue. And there'll be tints and shades and tones, and we'll talk about all those when we get a little further in depth in that part of our unit. Color schemes. And there's a whole class actually in college that you can take called color theory. All right, and I believe the last of the element of art is texture. So the way something feels. So we all have shirts that feel some way, or maybe something's rough or something's smooth. So you want to try to show actual texture. Maybe if you were making a sculpture and you were making something like a cactus or something, you might take little toothpicks to create something in clay. Or implied texture is the way it might feel. Okay, so real texture in real time, different fabric pieces, all sorts of different things you could do, like a rubbing on. I don't know if y'all did that when you were in elementary school, where you like put a coin under there and rub it with a piece of paper. Create some kind of a texture. Implied texture is trying to make something have a certain feel to it. So, for example, that person's outfit is very smooth and velvety, and then on the right you have looks like very choppy, almost carved out of wood, but really that's just a big pen drawing. So those are the elements of art. The principles are the way that you put them together. So you've got all your ingredients for your cake, and now you got to put it all together. So you will take your dry ingredients and mix it, your wet ingredients and mix it, and then you put the pieces together, and then you bake your cake in the oven, let it come out and cool, and then put your icing on and decorate it however you want. So the principles is a little fancier way that we can do something really interesting with the elements. So the first one we're going to look at is balance. So how did you put that on your, when we use that word composition again, how did you put that on the paper? How did you arrange it? Was it symmetrical or was it asymmetrical? Okay, so if you're looking at his basic shapes here, like Alexander Calder did in this painting, it's a lot of really symmetrical shapes by size and the way he placed them on the page. All right, so symmetrical is something that is basically mirrored, one side of the other. So like, for example, Leonardo's Last Supper here, Jesus is in the middle, and all the disciples are equally balanced on each side. And the perspective of the room and the walls there, if you notice, they're going down right here, and they're all pointing towards him. So very mirror-like, very symmetrical. Asymmetrical, on the other hand, is where your composition doesn't exactly reflect, but it might be showing more weight to one side or the other. So if you look at Whistler's grandmother here, she is sitting kind of looking off into space. We don't really know what she's looking at. We can assume she might be looking out a window, or maybe looking at having a conversation with someone. We don't exactly know, but it's very asymmetrical. And then we have radial balance too, which is everything that's very symmetrical. So if you look in our hallway, if you're in the building, we have some mandala circles that are out in the hallway that were done by students, and everything is in a radial or circle design, repeating pattern. All right, and the next principle is emphasis. So something that's a focal point. So we're looking at something that stands out, whether it's something that's really bright or really detailed and everything else is faded. So for example, the heart on this side, very bright red colors, and everything's kind of blue tones in the background. And then you have very detailed head here with lots of design and stuff, and then the body sort of looks faded. So emphasis is showing something in the piece that looks very important compared to the rest of it. Contrast is the difference between two things, lots of tension. So you could have like very dark images against very light ones, or very bright images that are creating shadows and contrast. Rhythm or movement, sometimes you hear people say, is showing something that's moving. So this is a person walking down the staircase. If you look at, you can see the movement, there's the legs, but it's not exactly easy to tell. So maybe you were drawing race cars going around a racetrack and you want to show their lines, that would be showing movement. Starry nights is a good example for that. So we see that there's something definitely going on in the sky. It's very active at night and probably a lot of wind. So that's what Van Gogh wanted to show when he has all the swirls in the sky, showing rhythm. All right, and then pattern is showing repetition, something that constantly is repeating itself. We see a lot of this in fashion, in patterns of clothing, but sometimes you'll see them in posters or in paintings as well. So you see here there's definitely repetitive shapes that are going on both pieces. And then unity is basically all of the elements and principles put into one piece. So if we look at this one really quickly, you can tell that all of these things, are all of these things are in there. So you have lines, you have obvious shapes, there's shading and value, you have texture going on in different areas of the smooth wall, and then you've got like cloth here, maybe metal, you can tell that from the reflections. Color, obviously use color. Then we have kind of a symmetrical balance, I think. She's pretty much in the middle, and then her hand is reaching out here, and then there's a kind of a hand here for the composition. And then contrast, things are smooth and light, and yeah, so all of the things are there in unity, okay? So a cool little acronym that you can remember is B Perfect Loves, okay? If you can remember that, you can just fill in the blank where B stands for balance, P stands for pattern, U for unity, and so forth. All right, and quickly we're just going to talk about media, or sometimes I might say medium. Those are types of work that you can use to make the artwork with. So you've got oil paint, acrylic paint, pastels, oil. Those are all wet medium. Pencil, charcoal, those would be dry mediums. So when we're talking about what kind of medium did you use in your artwork, what did you use? 3D medium, if you're doing like sculpture, did you use wood, did you use stone, those things. Okay, so when you guys worked earlier, you made a scavenger hunt, and so you took pictures of those things. After I gave you a brief definition of it, I just wanted to see if you could actually pick up on those things and see if you could take photos of them. But did they line up with what you were working on? You might have to go back and change some. I don't know. All right, but we're going to do our first project, okay? So we're going to use the elements and principles, and you're actually going to make some boxes, okay? So if you have a piece of paper, you're going to have to fold it to create an equal size square box. And what you're going to do is you're going to fold it several times until you get 8 spaces. So here's an example, okay? Basically, you folded the paper, and I don't know if you can see here, they folded in half, and then corner to corner. All right, so that left with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 spaces, okay? So in these, you're going to make 2 of them like that. So 2 pieces of paper, you'll need that, and scissors, and preferably a ruler, but you can fold it and make it into the 8.5. It could be 8.5 by 8.5 all over if you just use a piece of copy paper. So you're going to come up with a theme, okay? So a theme could be something like your favorite TV show, or your favorite movie, or your favorite cartoon, or your favorite foods, or your favorite vacation spot. Who knows? It can be a variety of things, okay? But something about, you need to think about in terms of how you can draw these things, okay? So let me give you some examples. So this was Peter Pan done by one student, and basically here, they took 2 of the squares, or 2 of the folds there, the triangle folds, and they created their title for it. So this Art 1 student actually looked at the font of the Peter Pan movie and tried to mimic it, okay? So they were real careful about their letters, and they wrote it out. So they wrote Peter Pan, and then they labeled the box Elements of Art, okay? And they came in about maybe an inch or half an inch or so, and then they kind of framed it. So you can go around your box. You don't have to go all the way out to the edges. If you want to, you can. But then they labeled it. So this box was going to be shaped. So they thought about Peter Pan's hat, okay? And then let me move myself a second. Then they thought about little Tinkerbell here, and she's in color, okay? Value, I don't know if you can tell from looking upside down, but they drew the skull, and so they kind of got some like shadows and a little shading where they smudged. Form was 3D, so they drew the hat. Texture, they were thinking about the crocodile and his little layers of teeth there. And then line was just a simple line drawing. There's not even any color in that one, and that's totally fine to do that on line, okay? So that was their Element of Art Peter Pan box, okay? Oops, sorry. Get off that, okay? And then this was their Principle of Art Peter Pan box. So you're going to do one for the elements and one for the principles. Okay, so they use rhythm, and there's him flying in the sky, and he's got some little marks there showing that he's flying. Balance, so they used kind of asymmetrical balance. She's a little bit off more, and then you can see the background. Pattern in the shirt. Unity, where all things are going on. Color, line, shape, value, texture. Emphasis. Looks like they're trying to emphasize maybe the shape of his belly or maybe his hair. And then contrast was showing the background and the foreground being 2 shades of darkness there. Okay, so here's some other really great examples that somebody actually did marker. Well, they used a variety of things. Marker, there's pencil here. So they did a comic book, and they went all the way to the edge of theirs, which you can do that, and they just incorporated their titles into it right here. But here's their elements of art, really cool kind of pop art type looking comic book lettering. And then you can see they did, they did lines for him. They did, let's think that's shape maybe, form of something three-dimensional, value showing shading in their comic, lots of color, and then the texture of, obviously he's got a lot of cool texture going on there. All right. And then there's the other one, the principles of art. And this same PowerPoint is going to be on your, in your presentation here that you're looking. So I'll put both of these here so you can go back and look. But there's been some really nice ones over the years. So I've kept some of them, taking photos of a few of them. Adventure Time, that was pretty creative there. They got a lot of really neat things going on. I really like pattern over here with the little penguins. That was pretty cool effort. And I also like how he did this. He took form and then used the letters and went down and created the word color. And then I had this student who was exceptionally awesome and ended up being an AP student later, but this was their Art 1 project. And they didn't ask me if they didn't have to put every little thing in a box. They wanted to create an entire composition on their square. So they just kind of floated their things around, and then I could tell where they, right next to it, like texture of Cheshire Cat's fur, value in the shading and things, form the three-dimensional glass line coming out with the lines here. And they really did an awesome job of trying to get all the elements of art. I actually did not get to take a picture of their principles of design, but I wish I had of now. But this is definitely a great example. So like I said, this is what you guys are going to do. You're going to go in and you're going to create the boxes, okay? You're going to download both of them. You'll have two separate pieces. So one will be the principles of art, one will be the elements of art, and they both have contain the same theme. All right, if you have any questions, feel free to email me.